Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Josh Humble, and I'm the Planning Institute Program Manager at SCUP. We're thrilled you've joined us for today's webinar. Today, our program will be hosted by Nick Santilli, Senior Director of Learning Strategy at SCUP. He'll be joined today by our panelists, Christopher Silva, Director of Housing at American University, Brett Jackson, Interim Associate Vice President for Auxiliary Services and Foundation CFO at the University of Georgia, and Neil Hart, Executive Director of Parking and Transportation at the University of Houston. Together, they'll be leading us in a discussion on the topic of looking towards fall 2021 and beyond, leveraging integrated planning for institutional and student success. A few notes before we get started today. A live transcript is available for today's meeting. If you don't see it in a link in the chat right now, I will make sure to drop it in again. Please click on that and feel free to access it at any time. Also, feel free to submit questions via the Q&A function today. We'll make sure to ask those of our panelists as we go and at the end. Finally, today's meeting will be recorded and posted online at the Learning Resources page at scup.org and shared with the rest of our community. So with that, I will hand it over to Nick.
Great, thanks, Josh. Welcome, everyone. We're very happy to have you with us today. Really, today, what we'll have is a conversation. There is no formal presentation. This is really a conversation about how our lives have changed and the work has changed, both from pre-pandemic to in the pandemic, and then thinking post-pandemic with respect to the kind of work that individuals do in the various areas that we all live. This is a three-way partnership, as Josh had indicated, with respect to three associations coming together to really talk about how our work and our work lives have changed, especially around our planning work, and how planning has a way of framing the kind of work that we all do. So I'm really excited for today, and one of the things I want to make sure again to reinforce is what Josh mentioned. Use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you have interest in asking any of the panelists a question as we move through our conversation today. We have about an hour. It'll go quickly, and so we're really excited about this opportunity to bring together folks from all three of our associations. So thanks, Josh. One of the ways that I wanted to help frame our conversation is around the notion of integrated planning. You saw it in the title, and what I wanted to do is just briefly provide you with a description of integrated planning that SCUP has developed and we use as a way of framing the work that we do and support as we go through helping provide professional development and other kinds of resources to the higher education community. And quite frankly, this term integrated planning is becoming more and more infused into the language of higher education, especially in terms of what accreditors' expectations are regarding institutional planning efforts. It's not enough simply to have operational plans or strategic plans. You need to demonstrate that the institution is engaged in integrated planning. So to help provide information for that, what SCUP has designed really here is a definition, a working definition that we use really for the nature of what integrated planning really is. And I highlighted particular words in this definition, which really begin to help us focus on what separates integrated planning, or creates integrated planning as a broader discipline. It's creating a sustainable approach to planning on a campus that builds relationships across the campus, aligns the campus, and helps institutions be prepared for change. And it engages all sectors of the academy, your constituents and stakeholders on campus as well as off campus. So how do you then bring people into an environment where they are involved and engaged in planning in some way? And so these are the kinds of things when we talk about integrated planning, how we frame it at SCUP. And whether or not you've heard this term before or familiar with it, you're probably engaged in doing it. And a good bit of it has really been a product of the changes we've seen in the work that campuses are engaged in from pre-pandemic to in the pandemic moment, and then even thinking about what life will look like post-pandemic. And really, as a way of kicking off, one of the things that I'm interested in hearing from our three panelists is how has your work changed? when you think about, a year ago, it was really about this time that we started hearing bits and pieces of some virus in China, and not really knowing what was going to happen. And then as we moved through those first early months in 2020 and then March, and thinking about then what our institutions did and how your work shifted, thinking about, how things changed in your life, both for your campus and yourself, the people that you lead, the people that you collaborate with on your campus. So Brett, tell us a little bit about how some of the things that you've experienced over this last year have brought some kind of focus to a shift in your work. And I know that you've taken on an interim role that started in August. But thinking about where you are now and what you were doing about a year ago this time, how have things transformed?
Well, I'll start with that shift that you mentioned as far as the interim role. So I actually, before becoming the interim associate vice president for auxiliary services here at UGA, I was actually the director with a portfolio of units that included all of the units except our dining services. So that was a big shift for me whenever I took on that role, and began to work with our dining program as well as we began to navigate into the new world and start classes here at UGA. Biggest thing for me was we really saw collaboration actually rise, I think, as we went through this, because it was absolutely necessary, obviously. Crisis management sent people that we maybe struggled to work with in the past together, and we saw people come together and actually work together to be able to overcome this. And a lot of very purposeful and intentional, times where we came together to work on something and make sure that we were able to set the university up for success. The other thing that comes to my mind is really the type of planning had to change from that long-term strategic thought for a moment to that operational thought. And we really had to focus in on the current picture, the immediate. We weren't necessarily able to focus so much on the long-term, and some of those long-term plans have even had to be pushed off a bit because of financial constraints and things like that. But we really had to hone in on what are we doing now and how are we getting through this. And then I would say, just having multiple plans, being very flexible. We jokingly said we had plan A through Z because you had to be prepared for every scenario as we return to campus. And I think it's going to be the same as we come out of this, having to have multiple strategies because none of us have ever been through this.
Mm-hmm. Great. No, thank you, Brett. Christopher, how have things changed for you at American U?
Wow, in many ways. I think one unique, just to set the information to everyone, our campus has operated nearly online this past year since March, and that has impacted not only our staff or students, but also the community surrounding the university. Many of the businesses and services that are around that area, our neighborhood in Washington, D.C. And so the reliance and quick action from our teams on using and onboarding new technologies was something that was critical for us. And technology not just that we used in student housing, but also that other colleagues across the university were using, all the way from, I would say in the last week of February, very few of us across the university were using something like Microsoft Teams. Today, it's our bread and butter. I think we eat and breathe Microsoft Teams, and the speed by which we did that was I think very interesting. It was part of our efforts of communicating, which is one of the elements that's key to planning. The other one that I'll expand a little bit that Brett mentioned, as we're thinking about planning and forecasting and kind of thinking of short-term, mid-term, and long-term, one of the elements that I found myself doing in collaboration with campus partners was doing some ideation exercises. What do we know right now, right? What's really possible? What may be happening? And then what do we control in this? And what are the pieces that we don't? And we need to be thinking about our elements or areas of risk for us, right? So we did that a great amount, and that helped not only with community building, but also giving us some concepts of ideas to be thinking about in our planning efforts. So I would say that those are really key aspects of how we did our work and also how it has changed. It's become part of our planning efforts now.
Great, thanks, Christopher. Neil, how are things at the University of Houston?
Sure, thank you. I think our biggest change was, our business and most of the things that we've done pre-pandemic were in person. So like to not have anybody around. In my group, in my area, we were pretty much back on campus in July, but yet many other departments still aren't back yet. So that integrated planning, trying to talk to them, we're here. They're not explaining to our folks why we're here, trying to set up our offices to be virtual queues, so you don't go to the office, you set up an appointment. We put everything online for an appointment, but still had some in person because we do have some residents living on campus. There were still a few face-to-face hybrid classes. So I think the biggest thing for us was just trying to manage that shift of being a heavy in-person department, now trying to do things remotely. Plus, most importantly, is keeping our folks safe. So transitioning all our offices, our shuttle buses, we had shuttle buses running last semester in the fall, making sure that they stay safe, they stay clean, that using the rear exit only to get on and off, separated from the driver. So just trying to make it, because to Brett's point, you don't know what you don't know, right? So we were constantly having those plans. Start with this, adapting to that, having to be very flexible. So it's even though we're always having to be flexible, this took it to a level that was well beyond anything that we could have imagined, for sure.
Yeah, no, that's really great. One of the themes that I hear in all of your comments about how campus adjusted is in some ways a rise in collaboration. Almost driven by the necessity of thinking about ways to stay in touch with one another, given that distance started to increase. Who's working virtual, who's still on campus, when could people be on campus, all of the various kinds of ways you cycle through all of that. And that's one of the things that I think, if I think about this is, what are the lessons that you learned during this period of time that you hope become part of the institutional operations now? And I think what I've heard is you're collaborating differently. And you may have thought about the kinds of things that you've done, and maybe were hesitant in the past, and now circumstances forced you to actually do this and realize, well, it wasn't so bad after all. And so it'd be interesting to really think about how your working relationships with your colleagues, both within your areas and then outside of your areas, have been influenced. I think, Neil, what are some of the things that you think, practices that you may continue to engage in that were relatively new that will become basic operations now for you?
I think the virtual queues, I think we'll keep that. I think we'll keep limiting the amount of folks that are in the office. Obviously, when we have 3,000 students as opposed to 40,000 students, we'll have to figure that out, how to manage that. But I think as much as we can still be available, but a little bit more organized, scheduled, I think that will help. And that was sort of we would have never pushed for anything like that without going through the pandemic. So I think that's a good thing to learn from. I think hopefully, this could just be Neil's opinion, but hopefully we will do more virtual meetings instead of running all across campus, right? So we all know we can do it. Even I can figure it out, and I'm not that smart. So we can do that, but actually be at our desk, save those times, and really save those meetings, those interactions of when you really have to be in a room together. It will mean more. I think those would help all of us, especially on a expensive campus, to really be able to free up some time for all. So.
Great. Brett, what are some things that you think, or maybe even hope, that will be practices you'll carry forward?
Well, two come to my mind immediately. One is with my colleagues in finance and administration, we actually have been much more intentional about meeting on a regular basis. We used to come together, once a month or so, and now we come together twice a week. just, we call them F&A touch points. We really are purposeful about communicating what's happening, what's going on, because there's just so many moving parts. And really, as you think about it, that's always the case. And it's kind of nice to have that, just that quick get together. Let's make sure we're all on the same page and then move on. So that's been nice. I think it's a better way to go about it. But then big one for us here in auxiliary with our own staff is we created something we called auxiliary connections during this time. For us, it was really important that we stay connected to our staff, because we obviously have staff members that never touch a computer. I mean, I have employees in the dining program that they're never on a computer during the day, and they were going home to try to figure out how to read through policies and stay engaged that way. So we did some really dynamic webinars and meetings and things like that, where we really connected with our employees. It's really exciting. They came to love it. And so we did it throughout the pandemic while we were home. Then we came back and we were actually able to use it. What was really great is it allowed us to use it to train our staff on what they were coming back to and help them to acclimate before we even got here. And then we also did some winter engagement this past winter. So we do continue that trend, and we look forward to continuing that. The other thing that I thought about is going along with what Neil said is, my dual role, it has made it much easier for me to manage 2 different areas on campus by being able to be in meetings back to back. I don't know that I love that, but it is definitely something that is helpful in completing the task that I have at hand.
Great. Thanks for that. Christopher, how about yourself? What are some things that you hope you can carry forward, or the institution carries forward?
Yeah, I think they surround this concept of using technology, using communication technology to improve 2 pieces. One, and they're connected. It's, for example, our main office front desk, right, that used to receive so many phone calls and walk-ins and emails. We onboarded some new pieces of technology to help improve that ticket tracking system. I've started using Zoom and chats to answer questions from students and families, and that made it so that our capability of answering questions was boosted significantly, and so it didn't become stuck to a physical space. Students have to walk into a front desk to do something. Connected to that is how that impacted the staff that served in those roles, and also the surrounding roles. And I'm not sure if you're all familiar with Washington, D.C., and I imagine in other places you also have the same problem that I'll describe, but our commutes are very long. It's very common that my staff has from 1 hour to 1.5 hour commutes. And so I think that because of the use of technology and because of improving the service that we provide students, we're able to also help provide more remote work opportunities and better retention strategies with our staff. The technology allows for all of that, and we may be able to have staff that works that lives in other states and works from other states. And so I think it really has helped us expand how we provide service and how we think about who works in those roles and how they do it.
That's very interesting. When you're all 3 of you talking about how a little bit more confidence in remote work and how that prompted what I've heard from some of our folks in the planning areas, especially with respect to HR and how it triggers revisions of policies around telecommuting, and what will that look like and what will that mean going forward, and then how that then kind of shifts to the focus that are for the folks that are the facility planners on campus. One of the big questions, and I know all 3 of you are also involved with facilities that you are engaged in, is that what will facilities look like now and into the future? We've seen some things that articles that have been generated by some of our membership for our journal, as well as webinars, and even thinking about some of our event content about, well, what does the future of office space look like? And all, is it more of a hoteling? What does the Christopher, I'm sure, what does a res hall look like? What will dining look like? All of these kinds of spaces, and sort of thinking about what are some of the things that you're hearing among, just even thinking about your campus, where people might are beginning to think differently about your campus and the kinds of things, and Brett, you mentioned earlier, we've been so consumed with the day-to-day operationally, strategic kind of planning has been, put on hold. But one of the things that I think most institutions are beginning to return to is we've got a plan for strategy for our future, because there will be one and we want to be in it. So what are some things you're hearing? Christopher, so talk a little bit about some of the things you're hearing on your campus about facilities and res life and the kinds of things that maybe in academics and even the interface of some of the divisions on your campus. And give Neil and Brett an opportunity to kind of think about what they've been hearing on their campuses as well.
Sure. Yeah. And some of the things that I have heard and we have talked about based on conversations with colleagues from other schools, and also looking at not just in the US, but outside of the United States, is should we provide more flexibility in one specific area, for example, in student housing contracts. Usually, it's very common I would say, for us here in our university, but I know in other schools in the US, to be very specific of, semester-based contracts, fall semester, spring semester, summer semester. In some other places, for example, where I've worked in the Middle East, in Qatar, or in universities in Australia that I've spoken with colleagues, having multiple types of contracts, some of them year-long, some of them month-to-month, measuring those and looking at what the interest is of the student population to come, of having more flexibility to come to campus. And this is with the second element connected with academics, is will there be more opportunity for online learning or hybrid learning that campus services will have to adapt to that. And so then the short-term housing, for example, or kind of week by week or month to month contracts may be something that those with a hybrid program, an online program, may be interested in participating. And so we have had those discussions here at our university. I've had conversations like that in a Kauai with colleagues from other schools, and it tends to be so far that it's connected a lot with the appetite and the interest to venture into a new area and kind of start little disruptions of the current model of operations. And so we haven't made any decisions or any kind of executed on the specific plan for next fall, but definitely those have been part of our discussions. How do we become more flexible?
Great, thanks. Neil, what are some things that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think Christopher sort of hit it right on there. And of course, selfishly in my role, we want everybody to come back, because we just built 2 garages in the last 3 years, right? And have a total of 6. And they wouldn't give us the concrete for free, so we unfortunately have to pay a debt service for that. So a very large debt service, I might add. So the flexibility part that Christopher mentioned scares me. I appreciate it and I understand it, and it shows that it works. But it is the thing, talk about things that keep you up at night. That, my friends that I used to be over, dining services here as well. So my friends over there, they have the same issue with meal plans, right? So parking, can you sell day to day? Sure you can, but is it going to cover that debt service? Is it going to be able to? So it's a whole shift of how you used to do it to how you're going to do it, and you still don't know where that is. But I think every faculty member that's had the taste of being able to sit at home probably likes a little bit of that option, because we have those same commute issues here in Houston, right? Students the same way. If I can go online today because it's raining, or this or whatever, instead of going into campus, do I need that full experience of a true parking permit, a full meal plan, a full whatever the things that we actually physically have to have people here for? So I think trying to find that happy medium between flexibility and being able to learn to see how things worked, and get back to also paying the bills as auxiliaries. I mean, all of us. And I see Brett shaking her head. At the end of the day, we've got X to pay. We got to figure it out, right? And we're not getting any help from anybody else. So it needs to be our areas that are generating that revenue. So it is. Yeah, like I said, I'm not against it as a whole, and I understand the flexibility as a person who looks out there and sees my empty parking spaces behind me and in my garage, it's very concerning. So.
Thanks, Neil. Brett, go ahead.
I was gonna say I shake my head a lot because we actually just completed 5-year plans that we do every single year, but we're updating those, and this year was a little bit more painful process to think through and to think about where we're going, and we've really seen ourselves have to kind of draw back on some things that we had some plans and some things we wanted to do in the near future that we really have to think about are those more 5-10 years out. That we've got to first I think get to a point that we stabilize, and we haven't quite reached that point yet. We've got to come back to where we were. So that's one thing for us. But the what I'm kind of hearing, and it's not dissimilar to what's already been said, but with dining in particular, we're hearing a lot about flexibility and pricing, customization. Honestly, we were hearing customization a lot early on, and we were hearing it thinking it was totally about the food. Really, a lot of what we're starting to realize is there's also this customization component to the actual meal plan that they want to purchase. Being able to really pick and choose how many, we have call points here that they're able to use in our retail locations, and then they have blocks for commuters. Being able to kind of create their own combination of that to be able to make it customizable to their needs. So hearing a lot about that, obviously, as everybody's already mentioned, that potential for continuation of some type of online learning or greater volume of online learning, which of course is somewhat problematic when you have a large campus with lots of parking decks and lots of facilities that you've got to pay for. But I think for us, what's been really interesting is watching, the fact that we have been able to maintain our parking permit levels, but at the same time seeing some loss in the daily parking. It's interesting to think about the potential for the future of really being able to maximize the use of those parking spaces in a different way. And I think that's what we're going to have to really wrap our brains around is, can we utilize those parking spaces more effectively and efficiently, and actually ultimately still be able to pay the bills, still be able to honor those debts that we have. So it'll be interesting. There's definitely something to take away there. And then last but not least, I think we've just seen our campus is more accepting at this point of things that allow us to move into an automated, format, such as a couple of parking decks that we've been able to put in pay stations recently, where we never would have been able to put pay stations in before the pandemic. So that's been helpful. It creates an efficiency immediately, but I think there's just an understanding that we're in a different time and that we may have to try some new things.
Yeah, great. No, thank you. It's it seems the real undercurrent here is adaptation and how campuses are adapting, and thinking about how you're meeting the moment. I think that's really one of the things that you've all described. Variations of planning that you're doing, both at in terms of your own work as well as the institution, and thinking about some of the kinds of things that are really ending up being pilots and wondering, gee, will this be successful? This may work. We might want to continue this into the future. And so thinking about how those kinds of things all fold in together. And as again, Brett, thinking about, the point you made about operations and strategic, I'm wondering, have your institutions have begun to perhaps, reorient towards, are we now thinking about strategy? And we've maybe have a place where you've reached some level of equilibrium. It's still fragile given, what we're experiencing in a lot of ways. It's not just the pandemic. It's also all of the other kinds of forces that were impacting higher ed prior to the pandemic. The enrollment cliff is still there. A year ago, I gave a talk at a QOI on that topic. And then, that was in January. And so, so how does this, this moment, along with the other complexities, Christopher, I think about your location in Washington, D.C. and the events, from last week and what's going on right now and what may be going on next week at the inauguration, threats to all of our capitals, looking at your institutions and where they reside and all of the other kinds of social things that are going on, as well as, I think one of all three of you hit on is campus finance. I think, outsiders don't realize how important the areas that all three of you oversee help and generate revenue to be able to have things happen on a campus. And I think that's, when I've talked to folks, they think everything's through tuition and fees. And then of course there's room and board, but that still doesn't cover it. and wonder why do you have to raise money? Why do you have to do this? Until they really begin to understand the higher ed finance model more completely, that you've all described, the challenges your institutions are facing. But where have you started now seeing the institution, and what role have you played, both maybe within your own area, to start thinking about strategic decisions you'd like to make to be able to move forward? And Brett, you mentioned, kind of thinking about 5-year plans, on a yearly basis, where you're adding that 5th year at the back end, or kind of rethinking. What's some of the thinking that's going on, both in areas that in some sense you have a little control over, or areas that you've been brought into? Has the institution started convening panels of cross-functional folks to talk about strategy going into the future? Neil, what's been your experience on your campus regarding the shift to strategy?
Yes, I think we are having those conversations, and it is definitely strategic in a way that we look at our contracts, our contractors, our vendors, what we outsource, what we still have in-house. How are we able to flex up, flex down? Some of this quote unquote slower time has allowed us to go back and look at those contractual agreements very, very close. Our food services outsourced, so there was some creativity there between the contract and what it was currently written to now to help smooth things out and hopefully get through this time and get up and running again. So I think from my area and my areas adjacent, the strategic conversation has been, obviously we never ever want to go through something like we just went through, but if there's something, like how are we set up to what were the things that we could have done better had we known this was coming? And then let's try to sort of really get ourselves in a position where we could sustain that. So whether that be fund equity that we carry over, how we do certain things, but it's really sort of with that. You can't, if I would have said this a year ago, oh, well, this is going to happen, you would all laughed, right? And that it would never have been like this. And that's crazy talk, it's just you being panicky. So we just need to really consider what's that rainy day fund that you need from a financial standpoint, and maintain that. And don't let anybody talk you out of it, because that rainy day could be a monsoon, right? And I think that's where we all end up being in our business. And let's not overstaff and be, let's just run as lean as we possibly can. Then that way we don't have to have reductions in force like we've had. We don't have to affect people's lives as much as possible. So again, using those contractors and vendors to offset where we can, so that we can flex up and down for busy times or times that we don't need them. So.
Great, thanks. Brett, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so we as a university had actually just undertaken a major strategic planning initiative prior to the pandemic. We actually were in the midst of turning in, as a division, our strategic planning objectives and those kind of things. So it was interesting to watch that kind of take a little bit of a backseat for a moment, but it has started to pick back up. I can even speak to here in our unit. Of course, we put together our strategic priorities as a part of that strategic plan. And we've gone back through them here recently and are starting to pick that up and think about how we're going to make sure that we're paying attention to that. We're planning, we're still aiming for those goals. And we actually started to look and we went, wow, we've actually been doing some of this despite the fact that we've been amidst this pandemic. So it obviously was very well aligned, because it was things that were very important to us. We continue to move that needle a bit. So I do see us starting to pick it up. I see some initiatives in particular. I've been involved with some initiatives. One in particular around staff professional development that we had to regroup and we had to rethink how that's going to actually roll out. But we will move forward as a university, and I see that starting to pick up and starting to move in that direction. So that's good to see. Speaking of the financial side of it, I have to say we were extremely lucky that we didn't have to face any reductions in force. But I too would agree that it's absolutely imperative that we get back to having a level of reserve that we are confident that we could sustain another situation like this, right? We were very pleased that we were able to maintain our staff. We, have gone through some times here where we've cut back on hiring, of course, but everything that's happened as far as for us has been through attrition, which we're really thankful for.
Great. Christopher, your observations?
I think we've been having discussions in similar ways that Brad and Neil talked about, but one aspect that I think we haven't mentioned yet, that something actually last week that we were having discussions about was how can we better support and retain and also improve the recruitment of our entry level staff. And I know there's a question in the chat, and it connected with everything that we've been working on this past week on an aspect that relates to retention and well-being of our staff. So in our office in Housing Residence Life, some of our colleagues that have been coming to campus to still do work in person are facility staff and entry level staff, which most of them are Black, African American, and individuals of color that also live further away from campus. And we've been talking about how, and also addressing with policies and processes in a time when, in Washington, D.C., we are being impacted by transportation delays, security issues in transportation. And so we've Human Resources actually was working with us to identify different methods of transportation for staff to get to campus. And we've also made decisions on staff being able to stay on campus depending on the conditions of that day. And so all those elements of understanding the realities of staff and identifying alternative ways, going back to something that I talked about at the beginning, that flexibility and recognition of importance of retaining staff is so critical. And we've been having more of these conversations. This was one that literally has just been happening the past few days for us, and involved, Human Resources or Inclusive Excellence colleagues, staff council. So definitely thinking about how do we integrate this, not just within our team, but also across the university and other functions. So.
Great, thanks, Christopher. Brett, some of the things around staff well-being, and that become, them now become, really to retention matters, or as well as recruiting. I mean, this was the question, submitted around how can you continue to reach out where you do have opportunities to hire, and even thinking about how do we, retain good staff and the kinds of needs that staff have to be able to thrive on your campus.
I'll go back to what I mentioned earlier on the auxiliary connections program that we created. And honestly, that's about communication. It really is about staying connected to each other and communicating. And, we tried to communicate with even the lowest level staff what was going on, where we're headed, where we ultimately want to be, so that they really got some additional insight that they never had gotten before. So that's where for us it helped to build the morale and create a better situation, honestly, than we went into the pandemic with, as far as our staff feeling connected to what was happening, feeling connected to where we were going. The bigger challenge is maintaining that now, right? Because they're all now in their job day in and day out, and you can't possibly connect to the majority of them even right now on a daily basis. Try to get out and see them as much as I possibly can as they work on the front lines, but it's limited for certain. So I think communication is the biggest thing that I think of that has helped us with morale. I think also just making sure we're providing them resources, making sure that we are giving them, helping them to navigate this, because it is a part of the work life too. It's not like we can say this is something you're dealing with at home and take it home and leave it there. This is definitely something that's impacting all of us throughout, whether it be during the day or at home. So really working with them very closely. We were lucky. We had just hired a new HR director prior to going into the pandemic. He literally joined us on January the 2nd. And then he had about a 2-month runway or so there, the 3-month runway before he was really acclimated to auxiliary. So he's been great in really reaching out to our staff. I can't tell you the number of staff members that literally have his direct cell phone number so that he can be in touch with them and help them through questions or concerns. It's paying a little extra attention, honestly. When it comes to morale, we've really got to be intentional about it. As far as recruiting, unfortunately, we haven't gotten to do a lot yet. We are in the planning process now of beginning to strategize and think about how we're going to go about, ramping up. Hopeful that one of our plans will be hopeful that the fall would be back to more like normal. And if that's the case, what would we need? What are we aiming for as far as hiring? So that'll be part of the conversation, is what are our recruitment strategies. But we've thought about everything from working with some local community colleges here in Athens that have some programs around dining and that kind of thing, to be able to establish some partnerships, to even going as far as we may have to put out some billboards to say, come to work with the University of Georgia Auxiliary Services. We've got some great opportunities.
Great. Great.
We'll be continuing to brainstorm on that and come up with new ideas, but definitely going to be a challenge.
Yeah, Neil, how about yourself? Both in terms of thinking about, I know you mentioned reductions in force, but working to retain your good staff, and when you have an opportunity to bring people back on board, what are some of the things that you're seeing regarding promoting well-being and retention of staff?
Yeah, I think to Brett's point, and it's communication. We're trying very hard to make sure. And again, as I mentioned earlier, late June, early July, we all came back. Then of course we had the reduction in force. So then it was the remainder of folks here. So as it continues on, it's an everyday process to try to keep the focus on the task at hand. Try not to think about what could happen if we continue to see, we're school starts next Tuesday, right? So we're waiting to see those final numbers of where we are with the spring semester. So then there's conversations above that we might have to reduce a little more. We might have to do some things a little different. So it's a very scary situation for all, outside of just the normal scariness of the situation, right? So am I going to have a job next week? Am I going to have a job? So trying to really just reinforce and be transparent enough as you possibly can be with what I know, and share the financials. We have staff meetings. We share the financials. It's not a secret. I mean, they see the parking lots. They see the campus, so they know. And for me in my position, I just continue to try to make the argument upwards that, to Brett's point, if falls back to normal, what do you want this department to look like? So what are you thinking? So here I can show you, and back to integrated planning, is that I can show you what we think we know in 1 year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, how that affects, and we can be out of the hole, be where we need to be, have our debt service ratio where we want it. So can you help us get through this? Don't make us make decisions where all of a sudden we come back in August and you want 100% full service, and we have 20% of the people that can give you that full service, right? So we're just managing expectations from a student standpoint, from an administration standpoint. The decisions we make now will affect the future, and even trying to rehire those folks. If we try to rehire in August, school's already started. I mean, so you're still behind. So we want to definitely keep the good people, and again, making the work areas as safe as possible, keeping people separated, giving them flexibility. Everybody's supposed to be doing self-tests before you come in. You feel bad, you stay at home. You've been around somebody, stay at home. We're being very, very flexible and compassionate to the concerns, but at the same time, we're all expected to finish the job. I mean, we need to get through it to get to where we need to be. So
good. No, I think one of the things that I'd like to have a little time to talk about as we kind of move to closing is, given your leadership responsibilities and thinking about the individuals that, one of the things we often talk about is how you do, engagement both up, down, and sideways across the institution. So when you think about, leading up, what is it that, and Neil, you touched on it in terms of trying to think about what the superiors need to know, or what, campus hierarchy needs to know, but then also your divisional, collaborators across the institution, but also your staff. And what I'd like to do is ask you to think a little bit about staff, especially as you have some individuals who may be new to your institution or even new to the roles that they're in, especially in middle management, where middle layers of folks, assistant directors and people like that, who move in and are now kind of wide-eyed and realize, boy, I never knew I had to know anything about planning. And so thinking about what kinds of ways have you helped your staff, and what kinds of things would you like available to you as a leader of groups of folks who need upskilling in certain areas. And of course, what's near and dear to my heart is how do you need support in terms of helping your staff do planning more effectively, both within your division, but then also across with their colleagues, where they have interactions with folks in facilities or in academic affairs or finance, those kinds of things. So Brett, what are some things that you have done or would think would be helpful to a person like yourself to help build capacity for planning within your area?
Yeah, what's funny as you were saying that, I kept thinking back to something we shared throughout our connections with our staff, and that was that we really want to get away from that hierarchical thinking and think more about along the lines of what we like to call a bubble organization. We don't want the staff to have thoughts and suggestions and ideas about how we can improve things and not be able to bring those forth. And I'll give you a real good example. We have a dining hall. We had to obviously really change to start the fall to be able to navigate the various restrictions. Well, we had a group of people in the dining hall working there every single day that could see the opportunity to reopen some of our concepts and be able to get back more toward normal, not normal, but more toward normal, and offer more opportunities to our students. They, of course, were not being heard, and they were sitting on it. And then eventually we got word of that, and we were able to nudge a little bit here and there. And we actually made that happen, and it was a tremendous impact to the students and those on our meal plan. So that speaks volumes to me, where we really have to empower the staff. We really have to give them a voice in the process. We have to make sure that they're a part of it, because in these types of situations, they are the ones that see exactly what's happening and what's going on. And if we're not listening to them, we're really probably missing some of the key components. So that's one thing I think with my colleagues across campus. As much as anything, it's just continuously making those connections, building those relationships, and you know how it works. We utilize those relationships then to actually get things done, and that's so important to our operations. And I think it's important that we as leaders are able to form those relationships to be able to help our operations move forward.
Great, thanks, Brett. Neil, how is it working with your staff and kind of getting them, upskilled to really begin to develop a planning sense about the work around the work that they do?
Yeah, I think like I mentioned, just showing and sharing, having these virtual meetings with the whole staff and showing the financials, showing where we are, what we're doing, sort of gets everybody thinking. Because I think previously you go about doing your job, everything's running smooth. Where that money's coming from to pay for you, pay for this, pay for that, I don't think was really a thought, right? So now, now they're in it with us, and to the point of sharing that information. So don't just go about and do your job every day. If you see something out there, let us know, because any kind of reduction we can make, or things we can change, a business practice we can change to be more efficient, we're all for it. And it's in benefit for all of us, right? So I think they see that. They probably wouldn't call it planning. I don't know that would be because planning has a different connotation, especially in a university setting here for sure. But I think their idea of getting the job done the best it can and still be happy, still be here. I mean, I think that's part of what has brought a pure focus to their jobs, and they're also looking at other people, right? So like, well, what does that person do? What does this person do? Why are they doing that or this? So there's a lot of questions. So if nothing else out of this experience, we've answered a lot of questions that probably wouldn't have been asked otherwise, of why we do things the way we do, why we don't do these other things, why those departments do these things. So we're able to, and then when we don't know, we get with that other department. And then we have like a little group, Zoom, and they explain why facilities does this, or how they're cleaning this, or how they're doing. So it's really been you're trying to make a little bit of lemonade out of the lemons, right? So I mean, we really try to do that. So I think everybody that's still here, and as we move forward, will have a great appreciation of the overall organization as a university and us as a department. So.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Neil. Christopher?
I was thinking, particularly in working with our mid-level managers that supervise different areas of student housing, helping them to develop a framework of what's possible, what are the possible scenarios and situations that may be coming down, short, mid, long term. Because in a time when there was so much uncertainty, we needed to find ways to help staff come back and be grounded, and help with staff stress and which was impacting their performance. And so the exercises that we did of visioning exercise, like I was describing in the beginning, what can we predict, what's possible, what do we know about our students, and let's develop some frameworks around that. That is something that we spent a good amount of time doing in dialoguing with our office staff. And then the last thing that I'll say is something that we've just become, I think, much better at is developing briefs for senior staff, and saying, okay, well, this is kind of the scenario around the use of isolation spaces. Here's the cost around it. Here's the material that goes behind it, right? Testing. This is and making sure that our senior staff was informed of those to help aid the process. So I think both of those pieces, in terms of engaging with senior leadership as well as helping our mid-level staff.
Great. No, that's great. Very good. I mean, and thinking about all the comments collectively that you've made, and also thinking about where you reside in the organizational chart. All three of you have a really difficult position, in the sense that you have folks that you supervise, you have colleagues across campus in similar functional roles, and you have also to mentor up and lead up. Chris, your last example, a really good one about what do senior leaders need to know when they're sitting around the senior leadership table having conversations about these things, making decisions. And so I'm thinking about all of this is really part of that mosaic of operational and strategic planning, but then also, Brett, to the point that you were talking about earlier about having plans from A to Z. Well, what are your contingency plans? Those specialized plans, what kind of tabletop things are you doing to be able to try to think about, well, what if this happens? Christopher, I'm sure you have those moments where we have to take 2 res halls offline and we've got them filled with students. What do we do? Those kinds of things, to think about those types of moments. And this is that, really that culture of planning that institutions develop, and how do you build those skills in your workforce? And then in your case, it's the people that you lead, and so that they become, empowered, which was another good thing that I've heard through all three, and thinking about, moving to the future, because all of these institutions that we have are, you work in, and others are beginning to think about where we're going. What's our aspiration on the other side of the pandemic? And I think we've heard some really good, examples of the kinds of things that you're doing that got you through it. And now you're turning towards, how do we continue? And really, how do we build capacity, to be able to, drive this going forward? And that's really one of the things that I like to end with is just that, our associations came together to have a conversation like this, with ending on how do we continue to help build capacity across all of our associations and our members. And one of the things that our associations are doing is putting together a workshop series in February, that will, asking folks from our respective member organizations to bring teams to focus on integrated planning and thinking about how you can then build capacity in your teams. We're building a really strong basic workshop series focused on integrated planning for individuals from our associations. Josh is putting up the information here. As you can see here, one of the things that we would really like us to begin to think about, as many of you talked about, while we've kind of gotten to a place where we've reached a steady state, now we're looking to that future. So I suspect that at this moment in time, many of our institutions are looking to fall 2021 and how we're imagining how this is going to look. And that means you've got to start planning for it now. And so if you're thinking about trying to build capacity in your teams, one of the ways to do it is to have a capacity building, team building experience with us, and trying to leverage some of the kinds of things that we do in our professional development in SCUP around integrated planning for institutional and student success. And so we're running some workshops available to members from all of our associations on these dates in February. As you can see, we tried to make the time amenable to no matter where you're at, East Coast, Central, Mountain, West Coast, so that it's you'll either join us later in your day or midday or early in your day at 2.5-hour bites with really an opportunity for you to bring a team along to have an opportunity to do some team building and get some really get some formative information around integrated planning. And so this was the exciting part of this membership, this relationship between our three associations. This is really important. And really it is, yes, you need to attend all of them. Each date is a different curriculum, and it builds upon each day. So that's why we try to keep them in short bites, and not and only 2 days out of a 5-day week. And so that was really, yes, it's a comprehensive, it's a 4-day experience, 2.5 hours, and we'll give you some time in between weeks to so that we're not sucking up too much of your time, but to give you an opportunity to become bring a team, do some work together, and even one of the things we might be we will be advocating is even bring some issues or problems that you are facing, and how would you then take an integrated planning approach to solving some of the things that you're facing at this moment in time and thinking about into your future. So I would like to just offer my thanks to all of our panelists. Thank you for your time. Really interesting conversation. Thanks to all of the participants who joined us. Really happy to have you with us. Thank you for your questions. And remember that this is being recorded and will be available through our websites for our associations. Josh, any other closing words?
No, just a sincere thank you again to Christopher, Brett, Neil for joining us, to our partners at Cool Eye and NACIS for helping us put this on, and for working together on this upcoming workshop. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.